And new details are emerging today over how former Nissan Chairman Carlos Ghosn managed to skip out on bail in Japan and escape to Lebanon. I think it was like $13 million. He's like,
okay,
not a lot for me. Phil LeBeau joins us now. It's part of the whole point, I guess. Phil, do you know, was it a base case or a harp case? Do you know anything? You got any details on that?
Well, and then the report was that they said, well, that's not how he got out of the country. Look, there are more weird stories out there about how Carlos Ghosn was able to get out of Japan than there are stories that have been actually confirmed by anybody. Because half the time you hear a report come out, and then a couple of hours later, well, that's not true. Somebody close to the Ghosn family says that's not true. So here's what we do know this morning regarding Carlos Ghosn's situation. And you can bet there will be more details over the next couple of days and more developments over the next couple of days. Let's start first off with Japan. Scrutiny there about how they were able to allow a guy under house arrest who had cameras, who had officers outside of his house, how they allowed him to get out of the country. By the way, they raided his house there today. The French government's in an awkward position. Yes, he is a French citizen. At the same time, the French government owns part of Renault, which is part of the Nissan-Renault alliance, which is very fragile right now. So how do they play this? And then you have Carlos Ghosn. He was welcomed in Beirut earlier this week. We did get a statement from Carlos Ghosn earlier this week where he said, I have not fled justice. I have escaped injustice and political persecution. I can now finally communicate freely with the media and look forward to starting next week. Exactly when we might hear from Carlos Ghosn next week remains to be seen. But here's the timeline. Think about it from Carlos Ghosn's perspective. Now, this is not saying what he did was correct or was right, but just from his perspective. He was arrested on November 19th. And yes, then he was stripped of his job with Nissan. Then he was indicted. But generally speaking, over the last 13 months, he has had limited, almost no conversations with his family, with his wife, and as a result, he clearly felt that the best move for him was to get out of that country. If you take a look at shares of Nissan Renault, we have yet to hear a formal comment from the company regarding Carlos Ghosn skipping bail and getting out of Japan. And the stock down 35% since his arrest back in November of 2018. It's a wild story, guys, and perhaps one of the more interesting things, Joe, is that you get these reports that are then denied, and then you get another wild report. I mean, these are all the little details that are going to be sorted out.
The family's
over the next
not necessarily going to confirm anything, right? Like, they may be shooting down some of these things, but I'm not sure that they would tell the truth anyway about what happened. It's not like they're saying, here's how he got out.
Correct. And that's why when Carlos Ghosn talks next week, I doubt that he is going to shed any details about exactly the plan to get him out, how it was executed, in part because they probably want to protect the people who helped them in Japan. Look, they didn't do this completely without some help in Japan. Yeah, so they clearly had to have some.
So I don't know if it was with you last week, but I kind of danced around, not actually saying I would have done the same thing if they treated me like that. I didn't really say that, but that's sort of what I was feeling after watching the whole saga, right? I mean, it's hard not to think that he was treated very well, okay? And I don't know, but like I said, I don't know the details of the accusations, but here it is. They just spell it out in the Journal. It's the headline in the Journal, or at least they took out of the piece in the op-ed page, obviously. It's hard to blame him for fleeing Japan after his ill treatment. And then it says, they go on to say it's been a fiasco from the start, from a dubious start, the whole saga. The best way for justice to be served now would be for truth about the accusations to emerge, for Ghosn to get his reputation back if the evidence is as weak as it seems, and they even go on to say for Japan to reform its justice system and corporate governance so they're more appropriate for the modern free market economy. So,
I don't think anybody would, Joe, I don't think anybody would disagree with that opinion or those opinions that you just read.
This guy skipped out on bail and we're on his side. I mean, that's rare. You know what I mean? But
right. But at the same time, that's why I think the most interesting sort of side angle here, how does France play this?
Right.
Because on one point, it is one of their citizens, and they were critical of how Japan was handling Carlos Ghosn. Yet on the other hand, they can't be too critical because they own part of Renault, and this Nissan-Renault relationship, incredibly fragile right now. I mean, it's on the cusp of falling apart.
Phil, I guess the question becomes, is Carlos Ghosn ever able to leave Lebanon? Is he kind of...
Oh, yeah.
stuck there.
Well, that's a great question.
That's
a great question. Look, he's got citizenship in Lebanon, Brazil, and France.
Right.
So theoretically, he could go to one of those countries. I'm not sure what the extradition treaty is. If there is one between Brazil and Japan. But it's an interesting question that you raise here. And then the other question that comes up is, will he ever be able to truly get his reputation back in terms of saying, look, here are the facts. This is what happened. This is what was not laid out by the Japanese authorities. Or is the fact that he escaped and skipped bail, will that always be the one story that people are going to focus on? And this other story, which is incredibly important, whether or not he misreported or did not fully report tens of millions of dollars in compensation, will that ever truly come out?